long before Moses parted the Red Sea, before plagues shook Egypt, before God thundered from Mount Sinai. Moses was born a slave. The children of Israel had multiplied greatly in Egypt. They were no longer a small family. They were a nation. And Pharaoh was afraid. He feared their numbers. He feared their strength. He feared what they might become. So Egypt enslaved them. The Israelites were forced into hard labor, building cities, shaping bricks, working under the burning sun. Their lives were filled with suffering, but they continued to grow. And Pharaoh grew more desperate. He ordered the Hebrew midwives to kill every baby boy at birth. But the midwives feared God. They refused to obey. So Pharaoh made his command even more brutal. He declared that every Hebrew baby boy must be thrown into the Nile River, a death sentence for an entire generation. It was into this darkness that Moses was born. A Hebrew woman gave birth to a son and saw that he was beautiful. She hid him for 3 months. Every cry was a risk. Every sound could mean death. But when she could hide him no longer, she made a desperate decision. She wove a basket of papyrus, coated it with tar and pitch, and placed her baby inside. Then she carried the basket to the edge of the Nile. This was not abandonment. This was faith. She placed the basket among the reeds and stepped back. Moses' sister watched from a distance, her heart pounding. The river that had drowned countless children now carried a fragile basket, and God watched over it all. At that very moment, Pharaoh's daughter came down to the Nile to bathe. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant to retrieve it. When she opened it, she saw the crying baby, and something unexpected happened. Her heart was moved with compassion. She knew immediately this was a Hebrew child, a child marked for death by her father's command. Yet she chose mercy. Moses' sister stepped forward and asked if she should find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. Pharaoh's daughter agreed, and so Moses' own mother was paid to raise her son. The child who was sentenced to die was raised in Pharaoh's household. Moses grew up as a prince of Egypt, educated, powerful, surrounded by wealth and privilege. But he never forgot who he was. He was Hebrew, and one day, that identity would change everything. When Moses was grown, he went out to see his people. He saw their suffering, their beatings, their chains. And when he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, something snapped inside him. Moses struck the Egyptian and killed him. He buried the body in the sand, but sin never stays buried. The next day, Moses tried to intervene in a fight between 2 Hebrews. They rejected him. They asked who made him ruler and judge. They knew. Word spread. Pharaoh found out, and the prince of Egypt became a hunted man. Moses fled, from palace to wilderness, from power to exile. He ran into the desert of Midian, with nothing but fear and regret. The man who would one day confront Pharaoh now ran from him. Moses had been saved from death as a baby, but now his destiny seemed lost, or so it appeared. Because God was not finished, not even close. Moses escaped Egypt alive, but his calling lay buried beneath 40 years of silence. In the wilderness, God would strip him of pride before clothing him with purpose. A burning bush awaited. Moses ran, not toward destiny but away from it. Behind him lay Egypt, the palace, the power, and a murder he could not undo. Ahead of him stretched the wilderness of Midian, silent, unforgiving, endless. The man who once wore royal robes now walked alone beneath the desert sun. Days passed, then weeks. Hunger weakened him, fear followed him, and eventually Moses collapsed near a well in Midian. This well would change everything. A group of women arrived to draw water, the daughters of a Midianite priest. But shepherds came and drove them away, claiming the well for themselves. Moses watched. Once, he had killed in anger. Now he stood in defense. He rose and chased the shepherds away, helping the women water their flocks. It was the first act of justice he had performed without violence. The women returned home early that day, and their father was surprised. When he heard what Moses had done, he invited the stranger to stay. That man was Jethro, the priest of Midian.
Thank you.
Moses accepted the invitation. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Moses found refuge in Midian. He married Jethro's daughter Zipporah. He started a family. He named his son Gershom, saying he had become a foreigner in a foreign land. The prince of Egypt became a shepherd. Every day, Moses led sheep across barren hills. No throne, no servants, no applause, only dust, silence, and time. 40 years passed, 40 years of tending sheep, 40 years of solitude, 40 years of obscurity. The man once trained to command armies now learned patience. The man once quick to anger learned restraint. The wilderness stripped Moses of pride and replaced it with humility. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, the people of Israel still suffered. A new Pharaoh ruled, one who did not remember Joseph. The Israelites groaned under slavery and cried out to God, and God heard them. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw their misery. God was about to act, but first, he would call a man who no longer believed in himself. One day, as Moses led his flock near Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, something impossible happened. He saw a bush on fire, but it was not burning up. The flames danced, yet the branches remained whole. Moses stopped. He turned aside. He said to himself that he must go closer and see this strange sight. At that moment, the silence of 40 years was about to be broken. The shepherd was about to hear the voice of God, and nothing would ever be the same again. Moses thought his life was over, that his best years were behind him, but God was about to reveal himself in fire. The call Moses ran from was about to find him. Moses stood frozen. The bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Flames flickered and danced, but the branches remained whole. This was no ordinary fire. As Moses stepped closer, a voice called out from the flames. God called his name, Moses, Moses. Moses answered with trembling words, saying that he was there. God warned him not to come any closer and told him to remove his sandals, for the ground beneath his feet was holy ground. In that moment, the wilderness became a sanctuary. God revealed himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses trembled and hid his face, afraid to look at God. Then God spoke of suffering. He told Moses that he had seen the misery of his people in Egypt, that he had heard their cries, and that he knew their pain. God declared that he had come down to rescue them from slavery and bring them into a good and spacious land. And then God spoke the words that changed everything. God said that Moses was the one he was sending to Pharaoh to bring his people out of Egypt. Moses was stunned. 40 years earlier, he had tried to save his people by force and failed. Now God was calling him again. Moses protested. He asked who he was that he should go to Pharaoh and lead Israel out of Egypt. God answered that he would be with him, and that this would be the sign that Moses would worship God on that very mountain. Still, Moses doubted. He asked what he should say when the Israelites asked who had sent him. From the fire, God revealed his name. God declared, "I am who I am." He told Moses to say that the God who simply is had sent him, the eternal God, the unchanging God. God instructed Moses to gather the elders of Israel and tell them that deliverance was coming. He warned Moses that Pharaoh would resist, but that God would stretch out his hand and strike Egypt with wonders. Only then would Pharaoh let the people go. But Moses still hesitated. He said the people would not believe him or listen to him. So God gave him signs. God told Moses to throw his staff on the ground. It became a serpent. When Moses fled in fear, God told him to grab it by the tail.
Reach out your hand and take hold of it.
It turned back into a staff. Then God told Moses to place his hand inside his cloak. When he pulled it out, it was diseased. God told him to put it back. When he did, his hand was restored. God said these signs would prove that he had appeared to Moses. Still, Moses resisted. He admitted that he was slow of speech and not eloquent. God reminded him that he made the human mouth, that he gives speech and takes it away. God promised to help Moses speak and teach him what to say. Yet Moses asked God to send someone else. For the first time, God's anger burned, but even then, God showed mercy. He appointed Aaron, Moses' brother, to speak on Moses' behalf. Moses would speak to Aaron. Aaron would speak to Pharaoh. God would remain in control. God commanded Moses to return to Egypt and assured him that those who sought his life were dead. Moses took his staff, the staff of God, and began the journey back. The shepherd was now God's messenger. The man who once fled Pharaoh was returning with divine authority. The fire had spoken, and Egypt was about to feel it. God had revealed his name. God had revealed his power. Now Moses would stand before the most powerful king on earth and demand the impossible. Moses returned to Egypt, not as a prince, but as a messenger of God. The land he once fled now stood before him again. Pharaoh still ruled. Israel still suffered. Nothing appeared to have changed, but God had. Moses and Aaron went before Pharaoh and delivered God's command. They declared that the Lord, the God of Israel, demanded that his people be released to worship him. Pharaoh laughed. He claimed he did not know the Lord and saw no reason to obey him. Instead of releasing Israel, Pharaoh hardened his heart and increased their suffering. He ordered that the Israelites must gather their own straw to make bricks, yet still meet the same impossible quota. The people groaned under the weight. Their hope wavered. They blamed Moses. Moses cried out to God, questioning why things had grown worse. God answered with power. God declared that Pharaoh would soon know his name. Then the signs began. Moses raised his staff, and the waters of the Nile turned to blood. Fish died. The rivers stank. Egypt thirsted. But Pharaoh's magicians copied the sign. Pharaoh refused to listen. God sent frogs. They swarmed the land into homes, beds, ovens, and palaces. Pharaoh begged for relief, promising to let Israel go. When the frogs died and relief came, Pharaoh changed his mind. Then came gnats. Dust turned into biting swarms that covered people and animals. The magicians could not replicate it. They admitted this was the finger of God. Pharaoh still resisted. God sent flies, thick, tormenting clouds, but spared the land of Israel. For the first time, Egypt and Israel were separated. Pharaoh offered compromise. God refused. Disease struck Egypt's livestock. Boils broke out on skin. Hail crushed fields and shattered trees. Fire fell from the sky. Egypt was devastated. Pharaoh confessed sin briefly. Then he hardened his heart again. God sent locusts. They devoured everything the hail had left. Still Pharaoh resisted. Then darkness fell. A thick darkness covered Egypt for 3 days. No one moved. No one saw. But the Israelites had light. Pharaoh summoned Moses and offered another compromise. God rejected it. Then God declared the final plague. God warned that at midnight the firstborn of every Egyptian household would die, from the palace to the prison. But God provided a way of escape. Each Israelite family was told to sacrifice a lamb and place its blood on the doorposts of their homes. That night, the angel of death passed through Egypt. Where blood was seen, death passed over. Where it was absent, mourning followed. A cry rose from Egypt like none before it. Pharaoh's own firstborn died. Broken at last, Pharaoh summoned Moses. He ordered Israel to leave immediately. After centuries of slavery, Israel walked free. They left Egypt in haste, carrying what little they had. But freedom had only just begun. Behind them, Pharaoh's heart would soon change again. Ahead of them, an impossible sea awaited, and God was about to do the unthinkable. Egypt had been broken. Israel was free, but Pharaoh was not finished. Between slavery and promise stood the sea, and God was about to do the unthinkable, was about to make a way where none existed. Israel moved quickly. They left Egypt behind before fear could return. Men, women, children, entire families walked into the wilderness. For the first time, they were no longer slaves, but freedom felt fragile. God led them not by the shortest road, but by the wilderness. By day, a pillar of cloud guided them. By night, a pillar of fire lit their path. God was with them, but behind them, Pharaoh's heart changed. He regretted letting Israel go. He gathered his chariots, the finest army in the world. Egypt pursued. The sound of hooves thundered across the desert. Israel looked back and saw dust rising on the horizon. Pharaoh was coming. Fear spread through the people. Ahead of them lay the Red Sea. Behind them stood Egypt's army, trapped. They cried out in panic, accusing Moses of leading them to die in the wilderness. Moses stood firm. He told the people not to be afraid.
Do not be afraid. The Lord will fight for you.
He declared that the Lord would fight for them. Then God spoke. God commanded Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea. Moses obeyed. The wind began to blow. All night long, a powerful east wind drove back the waters. The sea split. A path opened through towering walls of water. Dry ground appeared. God placed the pillar of fire between Israel and Egypt, blocking Pharaoh's advance. Israel stepped forward. They walked between walls of water, the sea standing like a fortress on both sides. Children crossed, elders crossed. The entire nation passed through. When the last Israelite reached the far shore, the Egyptians followed. Pharaoh's army charged into the sea. Then God confused them. Their chariot wheels clogged. Panic spread. Too late, they realized the Lord was fighting for Israel. God commanded Moses to stretch out his hand again. The waters rushed back. The sea collapsed upon the Egyptian army. Not one survived. The threat was gone. Israel stood on the far shore and watched their enemies washed away. They believed the Lord. They trusted Moses. Songs of victory erupted. Miriam led the women in praise. They sang of the Lord's power and his triumph over Egypt. The God who saved them from slavery had proven himself mighty, but the wilderness still lay ahead. The sea had been crossed, yet the journey had only begun. Israel was free. Their enemies were defeated, but freedom required faith. In the desert, God would test his people, and Moses would face his greatest challenges yet. The sea was behind them. Egypt was gone, but freedom was only the beginning. Ahead of Israel stretched the wilderness, vast, silent, and unforgiving. God had delivered his people, but now he would shape them. The God who saved them would teach them how to live. The journey led them to a mountain, a mountain wrapped in mystery, a mountain where heaven would touch earth, Mount Sinai. Thunder rolled across the sky, lightning split the clouds, the mountain trembled violently, smoke rose like a furnace, the people trembled in fear. They stood at a distance while Moses ascended the mountain alone. God descended in fire. The sound of a trumpet grew louder and louder, until Moses spoke and God answered him with thunder. God declared his covenant. He spoke words meant to shape a nation, laws not to enslave, but to guide. God gave commandments, words of truth, justice and holiness, commands to love God alone, to honor parents, to protect life, to reject theft, lies and covetous hearts. The people heard the voice of God and were overwhelmed. They begged Moses to speak for them, afraid they would die if they heard God's voice again. Moses assured them that God's presence was not to destroy them, but to teach them reverence. Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. But below the mountain, something tragic unfolded.
He has come not to destroy, but to teach you reverence.
The people grew impatient. They wondered if Moses had died. Fear turned into rebellion. They asked Aaron to make them a god they could see. Gold was collected. Fire melted it down, and a golden calf emerged. The people celebrated. They worshipped an idol, breaking the covenant before it was fully given. When Moses descended the mountain and saw the corruption, his heart shattered. He threw down the stone tablets. The covenant lay broken. At the foot of Sinai, judgment followed, but mercy followed too. Moses interceded for the people. He pleaded with God not to destroy them, asking God to remain with them despite their sin. God listened. The covenant was renewed. New tablets were carved, and something extraordinary happened. God allowed Moses to see his glory. Not fully, for no one could see God and live, but enough to leave Moses, changed forever. When Moses came down the mountain again, his face shone with radiant light. The people were afraid to look at him. The presence of God had marked him. From that day forward, Moses wore a veil when speaking to the people. The wilderness journey continued.
We have our laws. Rise, and let us continue our journey with faith.
God provided manna from heaven, water from the rock, guidance through cloud and fire. Yet the people complained. Again and again, they doubted God's care. They longed for Egypt. They resisted trust. At the edge of the promised land, God commanded Moses to send spies into the land.
The Lord our God has told us to go up and take possession of the land.
12 men went. They returned with fruit, proof of abundance. But 10 spies returned with fear. They spoke of giants, of fortified cities, of defeat. Only 2, Joshua and Caleb, trusted God. The people listened to fear instead of faith. They rebelled again.
We should return to Egypt. We never should have left.
And God spoke judgment. Because they refused to trust him, that generation would not enter the land. They would wander for 40 years, 1 year for every day the spies explored the land. The wilderness became their classroom. Time passed. Years turned into decades. The old generation died. A new generation rose. Moses remained their leader, patient, burdened, faithful. But even Moses was not perfect. At Meribah, when the people demanded water, Moses struck the rock in anger, instead of speaking to it as God commanded. Water flowed, but Moses had disobeyed. God declared that Moses would not enter the promised land. The leader who confronted Pharaoh, who parted the sea, who spoke with God face to face, would see the land but never walk in it. Still, Moses served faithfully to the end. Near the end of his life, Moses gathered the people. He reminded them of their journey. He warned them to obey God when they entered the land. He blessed the tribes of Israel. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo. From the mountain, God showed him the promised land, stretching wide and beautiful. Moses saw what he had waited for, his entire life, and it was enough. There on the mountain, Moses died. God himself buried him in a place no one would ever find. Israel mourned for 30 days. Joshua rose as the new leader, and the story moved forward. Moses never entered the promised land, but he fulfilled his calling. He delivered God's people. He revealed God's law. He walked with God in glory. And centuries later, on another mountain, Moses would appear again, standing beside Elijah, speaking with Jesus, the lawgiver, standing with the Savior. Because Moses' story was never about Moses, it was about a God who delivers, who dwells with his people, and who keeps his promises.